Welcome to this episode of the Doctor's Podcast with Rabea Akram. Today we're going to do something different. Today, me and Dr. Travis Zigler, who is an optometrist and eye doctor from the United States, we're going to go live on Facebook, and Travis and I are going to have a conversation on brain performance, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, and how we can heal trauma. So keep watching. Travis, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited.
So now, before we jump into the topic at hand, let's just talk about who you are. Let viewers know who you are, where you're from, and then what you do for a living.
Right. Absolutely. So I'm a medical doctor by training. I'm also an entrepreneur. These days, I'm more an entrepreneur than a clinical physician. But I started out my career as working in the clinic in the field of neurology. So I have several years of experience in working in the clinic, treating patients with all sorts of brain diseases. And that's really where my passion for prevention and brain enhancement, really health enhancement and prevention, got started. And I actually co-founded a company called Brainvincible, which is a Munich, Germany-based company. So I'm based in Germany, in Munich, where my company is also the main part of our company is. And our company is based as a mission-driven company. So the focus is cognitive performance enhancement. Like really the motto and the mission of the company is to take human consciousness to a next level, speaking broadly. But you do that in baby steps, and we have many different ways of doing that, including brain training programs, which I'm happy to talk about, moving on later. But in a broader sense, I am someone who is by training a medical doctor and with a background in neurology, and I have done extensive training in the fields of neurofeedback and dementia and cognitive performance. And I'm happy to talk about all those things with you today.
Yeah, the main thing I want to jump into today is, we help dry eye sufferers, and in the dry eye community, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of unhappiness. And so what I want to get into today is just how we can train our brain to be happier, how to perform better habits and get those habits to be more ingrained. And so we don't stop them, and then more like just well-being in general. So I'm pretty sure we're going to get into all that. But side note, Munich definitely trained my brain a little bit, because that was the first time I've ever been somewhere where I felt completely lost because I didn't know anything about the language. So we learned a little bit of the language beforehand, just like how to say hello and yes and no and please and all that. But when we got there and we're looking at the road and we're looking at the maps, we're just like, I have no idea what this says. And we kept seeing the same word over and over and over again. And we're just like, what is this word? It's everywhere. It was street.
It's funny, Travis, because you actually have a very German last name, Zigler, and hearing you say that, it's very funny.
Well, it's funny because I've traveled quite a few places, and we go to Latin America a lot. We go to Central America and South America, and I don't know Spanish, but it's familiar to me. So like I could get around and it didn't feel lost. But when I went to Germany for the first time, I realized I didn't know anything. And it was just like, wow, this is intense. So I had to learn quite a bit when I was there, but that's not what we're talking about today. So let's just jump into it. Can we just go into what neuroplasticity is and then what neurogenesis is?
Yeah, 100%. So let me start by just giving a very quick background on, how we back in the day, the scientific community and doctors, they used to think that the human brain cannot change after a certain age, right? And even today, people often think that intelligence is something fixed. And you hear people even today saying things like you can't teach an old dog new tricks and stuff like that. So there is this. In a lot of ways, people have this notion that intelligence is something fixed. You are a certain way, even personality wise. But modern science suggests absolutely otherwise, because of the term neuroplasticity. What we have found out in the past few decades, thanks to really very highly advanced imaging techniques like fMRI and many other different scientific advancements, that the human brain does change throughout its entire life, and it is continuously changing. And the change is not always negative. It's not necessarily always a decline. People can actually have objective measurable changes in the brain structure and function. And what's most interesting is these changes that happen depend very much on how we treat our brains, our environments, and how basically we do everything from thinking the thoughts and what we feel and what we put in our bodies and the environment in which we live in. So those things very much shape our brains, the actual structures and connections in our brains, and this ability of the brain to kind of this malleable functionality of the brain, this ability to constantly keep changing, is in a broader umbrella term known as neuroplasticity. And when we talk about, and the coolest thing is it doesn't just stop there. When we talk about how the brain develops and keeps changing, we now know that even new brain cells are born, even in adults throughout our life. Although the rate may decline a little bit in younger children, the rate is much higher. However, even in adults, we see new brain cells being born in a process called neurogenesis in certain parts of the brain, not in all areas, especially in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is related to memory formation and how we navigate in our space, which is very, very related to different forms of intelligence. And what scientists have also found out is that the neurogenesis, this ability to form new brain cells, is also very much dependent on external factors. So a very small part is always genetics, what we get from mom and dad, but a very, very large part of the picture is how we treat our brains. So this is what makes it very interesting in terms of you mentioned happiness and well-being. Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted there. Got to unmute myself first. So let's jump into just, you mentioned a couple times there how we treat our brain. So what are some ways that we can treat our brain better in order to increase the neurogenesis, the neuroplasticity, forming those new cells, forming those new memories? And let's just jump into how we can treat our brain a little better.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Travis, because how we treat our brain, it's basically what we are doing moment by moment all the time. And it's not just about I do one time a really great thing for my body and for my health, and that's done. If I'm treating my body and generally engaging in not so health promoting activities. So it starts very simply. It starts with the very thoughts that we think, because there is a saying in neurology that the neurons that fire together wire together. So if I'm engaging in repetitive negative thinking or negative feelings, those are the connections in the brain that are going to get stronger over time. And the same goes for habits. So habits are usually hard to break because of the very same reason, neuroplasticity, because we have been engaging in them for such a long time. And the very easy and best way to treat our brains really well is to just engage in health promoting and happiness promoting activities, anything that kind of gets our brains to engage with our environment and just try to live in a stimulating environment that gives our brain that that push to kind of challenge, to raise its game and form those new connections and stay healthy and robust in that way. Yeah, if you want, I could give you a few concrete examples.
Well, I'll go through maybe some things that I do, and maybe that will be more examples. So when I wake up in the morning, my first 5 to 30 minutes of my day, depending on when my son wakes up, but my first 5 to 30 minutes of my day is usually spent in meditation and prayer. And so just kind of getting very present in the moment and thinking about what I'm grateful for, or just who I am, and just prayer. And so that's kind of how I begin every day. And then I usually pop in something like a podcast or an audible book to learn. And so I like to learn a lot more. And then I engage in some exercise. So I usually do at least 10 minutes of exercise. if not up to an hour. Just depends. I
Yeah.
always do 10 minutes right when I wake up, and then I usually jump into something else later, which is usually 30 to 60 minutes. So that's kind of like my morning routine. And then I have
Yeah.
my trusty green smoothie that I'm still drinking at 10 a.m. And then I also have my hydration, my water. So I drink,
Yeah.
2 to 3 of these, and then I have my green smoothie. And so that's kind of my morning. It's
Yeah.
meditation, exercise, drinking, hydration, and then also learning. And so I'm guessing those are all pretty good for the brain.
Oh, I love that. You just pretty much, summarized my my entire interview. No, aside jokes apart, but those are really powerful things. I mean, meditation. It's, the research evidence is just compelling. You know how I have recently read about a Harvard study that literally, shows that the size of the hippocampus is increasing in people who are engaging in mindfulness activity for as less as 20 minutes a day. So and you hear from patients, I hear from patients, clients all the time, how this, as little as you said, you do 5 minutes of prayer and meditation in the morning, and as little as that can actually have an impact on how you feel and how your brain actually ages with time, literally, objectively, in a measurable way. And there is one study that shows, after 10,000 hours of active meditation, you can actually have measurable objective changes in the brain that really, the robustness of your brain, is measurable, and that's incredible. And with, you don't need any kinds of special equipments, nothing to do that. You just need to sit quietly and just be mindful, and that's incredible. I think that's one of the easiest ways to, make sure that we treat our brains well.
Now,
And you mentioned, please go ahead.
I was going to say, for the viewers out there that just heard, wait, I have to meditate for 10,000 hours in order to have success with this? No, don't think that. That's just what the study showed. So
Yeah.
just start with that 5 minutes a day in the morning, even 30 seconds a day if you've never meditated. And meditation is not as hard as you think, but it can be hard. And so the key
Yeah.
thing with meditation is just making sure you focus on your breath and stay in the present moment. Your thoughts are going to go crazy. That's part of it. I have meditated for 5 years and my thoughts still go nuts. And so always bringing yourself back to the present moment and focusing on your breath. That's the key thing. And if you can do it for 30 seconds a day, that's better than nothing. So don't think of the 10,000 hours and get like freaked out from that. Just focus on what you can do today, which is like 30 seconds to a minute to 5 minutes. And then eventually I have friends that do it for like 3 to 4 hours a day, which I don't have time for that because I have a 3-year-old. And so that just doesn't happen.
Yeah. So true. So true. I mean, baby steps, and always, the even a little bit of something is better than just, getting overwhelmed and looking at a big picture and thinking, oh, I'm never going to be able to, have everything perfect. And that's life. Nothing is ever perfect in life. And, even if I go ahead and do a little bit of exercise, that is at the end of the day beneficial. So absolutely.
So now let's move to my evening routine and kind of my nighttime routine. So when I'm done with my workday, I like to write down my visions, which
Yeah.
is like the things that I want in life. So you can think of that as superficial or familial. So like, I want a healthy family of 4. I want health and happiness for myself. I want to help heal 1 million dry eye sufferers. I like to help brands on Amazon. And so those are some of the things that I write down. And so I write down my goals. I write down what I want in life, so kind of my visions. And then I also write down 3 things that I'm grateful for that day. So it might be something like a nap with my wife, or a walk with my wife, or that I got to exercise for an hour this morning, that I played with my son in the sandbox for an hour. So I like to write those down at the end of the day. And then I like to read for about an hour before I go to bed on a paper book. And so I do all that to kind of wind myself down. But I read positivity. I don't read like not fiction books. I like to read things that are positive towards either spiritual guidance or towards business. And then that's the last thing I look at before I go to bed. And so it creates that positive environment for my sleep, which is then when I dream a lot about things a lot better. What I see most of my patients do, and most of the viewers might do this too, is they have their TV on right before they're going to bed, which is affecting their sleep, but they usually have it on the news, which is bringing a lot of negativity into the bedroom. And then they're getting that right before they go to bed. So that's kind of my evening routine is visionaries. I write them down, my goals written down, and I write the same thing every day. and then 3 gratitudes, and then I read for about an hour.
Yeah. Well, I love that, Travis. I think I'm gonna write that one down for for myself. It's just so perfect. I mean, I'm happy if I'm hitting one or two of those, in my evening wind down routine. But each and every one of those are incredibly powerful. You talked about gratitude, and there's just so much compelling evidence, and people who practice gratitude are just so much happier. Just focusing on the positive, like you said. And yeah, that's very powerful.
So can we talk about how the brain gets stuck in these negative trauma related loops? Because I think this will apply to our dry eye sufferers, because these are patients that are suffering dearly. They have severe dryness, irritation, and they feel like there's no more hope, and there's no hope left for them. They can't heal this disease, and that's what they're feeling. And so they're stuck in this negative loop. Can you just talk
Yeah.
about maybe what that is and then how to rewire it a little bit?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when we talk about trauma, the important thing to understand is it doesn't necessarily have to be a big trauma like death or, PTSD for war veterans and stuff like that. Trauma is more common than we think. People in everyday life can get traumatized by small things if they don't have the tools, the proper tools for processing everyday situations. So it can be something as simple as a conflict with a coworker that eventually, if it's not processed properly, it gets kind of people get stuck, hold on to grudges, and it takes up a bigger space in our brains than it should, because that memory, that incident was not processed properly. And this is when it becomes problematic, because it kind of, this unprocessed negative event kind of eventually end up affecting how we show up in our lives in a very maybe even if it's not at a conscious level, it can happen at a subconscious level. So this is why it's important to talk about trauma and to understand that it's very, very common and normal for people to have small traumatic experiences, and if we let them accumulate, they can become the cup kind of overflows because there's too much stress and there is too little outlet. So, talking about trauma, what really happens within the brain when we get stuck in these kinds of trauma patterns is, we have a very primitive part of the brain called the limbic system, which is where emotions are processed. So, when we think back in time from an evolution perspective, this is the part of the brain that would get activated when we would come into contact with, say, wild predators. Say we see a lion and our ancestors would have to run. So this is where fight or flight response happens, and our body gets into a state of very a fighting mode where we're hyper vigilant and overly alert and ready to fight. All those neurochemicals and hormones such as adrenaline is pumped very high, and cortisol, and all those physiological reactions happen. And normally when we're able to kind of let go and just to release that traumatic experience, whatever it is, when we're able to let go of that for good, usually our brain would learn that, okay, that part is gone, we're back to the normal calm state. So our prefrontal cortex, which is the more rational part of the brain, would get back its control. And that primitive part of the brain that is on overdrive, the fight or flight, the emotions overflowing, that would again come back to its calm state. So what happens when we get stuck in trauma, we're not able to process. And this is important to know that it may not be conscious. It can even be at a subconscious level, that we're not aware of it, but our brain is still stuck to this trauma pattern. And whenever we come into contact with anything remotely, related to that trauma experience, or if it gets really bad, it could be something entirely unrelated, but our brain at some level gets a message that there is danger, that you need to, go on that overdrive again, become hyper vigilant. And when that becomes the normal state, because when that happens, like the neurons that wire together fire together, if that keeps happening too often, that becomes our state, our baseline state of being. And Travis, this is more common than we think, that people living in this state of hypervigilance, constantly throughout our day, because of our modern lifestyle too, because we're constantly, on social media comparing each other's lives, and we have all these deadlines and appointments to keep. So it's easy to also get caught up in that vicious cycle, and which again negatively impacts this trauma loop. So this is where this getting stuck in that state, that's where the wiring in the brain happens, when people kind of have unprocessed emotions and trauma.
Yeah, so I'll try to maybe give an example of this for dry eye, and then maybe
Yeah.
I'll give a personal story in my life where I have a negative trauma related loop that hits me, and it shouldn't. It should be a positive loop, and it unfortunately has
Yeah.
turned negative due to a trauma in my life. But for dry
Yeah.
eye, I think that this loop can occur when you're having a good eye day, and you've been treating your dry eyes right, and you've been cleaning your eyelids, you've been eating well, you've been drinking well, you've been hydrating, you've been doing everything right. And then you may have like a little bit of irritation one day just from something, a little flare up, and you instantly go to the state that, oh no, here's my dry eyes again. And then unfortunately, that negative mindset loop will cause your eyes to be drier as a result of you thinking that it's
Yeah.
going to be a bad eye day when your day's just begun. So like if you wake up, you have a little irritation, you think it's going to be
Yeah.
a bad eye day because you're so used to having those bad eye days. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
trying to nip that in the bud can really help out with just like, don't think the rest of your day's ruined just because of something that happened in the morning. And this also goes back to things like when people say, oh, I'm just having one of those kinds of days. You're having one of those kinds of days because that's what you're focusing on. You're focusing on the negativity, and then you're finding all the negative things that are happening in your life. And then that loop is just going to continue down there. So
So true.
the personal story that we have, a lot of our viewers know that we lost a son in November of 2019. And when I see somebody pregnant now, I think about all the things that could happen to that baby instead of like, oh, great, you're pregnant. This is so great. Now that I've had that trauma happen to me, it was a year and a half ago now, but
Yeah.
it's still there. So when I see somebody that's pregnant, all I think about is I hope nothing happens to that child, because the worst that could happen to ours did. And so I have that loop in my brain that I've been trying to fix and trying to make it more positive, or thinking back to where I used to think like, great, you guys are having a kid. This is so exciting. Where now it's just like, great, you guys are having a kid. I hope nothing happens to the child because
Yeah.
something happened to ours. And so like, that's how my brain got rewired. And now I'm trying to get it back. And it's hard. It's really hard. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it takes a lot of positivity, and meditation's been my number one helper, and spirituality has been my number one helper, just like
Yeah.
surrendering, because
Right.
there's not much else I can do for it. And so I shouldn't keep, going back to that trauma, but it's hard to get over. And anybody that's experienced trauma knows this, that no matter how small the trauma can be or how large it is, trauma is trauma, and it doesn't have to be from war. War is a dramatic, extreme trauma, but little trauma is like a car accident. That's not little, but or what happened to my son, which isn't little either. But anything can cause that kind of PTSD memory to kind of to wire. So I just want to share that because it's hard to overcome negative loops, but you can do it. You just got to figure out how to do it and just keep working on it, which I do every day.
Right. Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a powerful story, and it's just a perfect example of that negative loop we've been talking about, and it very clearly demonstrates that those patterns and triggers, and there are ways to overcome these trauma loops, like you already said, and you already are doing incredibly in terms of the meditation and the spirituality. You mentioned surrender, and that is just so powerful, because in I know traditionally lots of different traditions have known, the power of surrender, of letting go for millennia. And however, science is just catching up in a lot of those things. We have seen that with gratitude, how powerful gratitude can be, and its surrender is another one of those things where it's just also powerful in terms of just letting go and overcoming those trauma, stuck trauma loops. So I love those two examples that you gave.
Well, let's jump over to something completely different. But no, that was a great summary. I was just going to ask you, how can I rewire that? And then you summed it up for me. So that was great. So what is the future of brain training? Like the role of all this neurofeedback, and what is biohacking in this? And what can we do today to help with brain training? And where do you see brain training going?
Yeah, that's an incredible question. And, I am working in the forefront of this because I'm just so passionate about, just doing something about our brain health and brain performance instead of treating brain conditions when it's already very kind of progressed and late in terms of cognitive decline. So brain training is, as we know it now, there is the traditional meditation, which is very powerful. And I see technology coming more and more into this in terms of neurofeedback, where you can measure your brain waves. And we will see more and more of those things come in, because there are studies being done now that show that, you can, in a much, much shorter time, through neurofeedback practice, you can attain states of brain waves that are similar to, monks who have been Zen masters who have been practicing meditation for many years with the help of feedback. So this is what biofeedback and neurofeedback does. It kind of accelerates your learning. It gives you back in real time a feedback that you see that, okay, here is what happens when I get into a very deep state of mind. And that is very fast learning. So this is very powerful, and it has shown to be powerful not only in the brain and cognitive performance enhancement space, but also in treating various diseases. We have seen neurofeedback really being powerful in treating ADHD and PTSD and those kind of things. However, talking from a peak performance standpoint, doing this kind of training really gets you to a state of brain activity that is very restful and regenerative. And getting to that state of mind in a everyday basis, where you practice, makes your brain more plastic in, increasing the neuroplasticity we talked about, increasing the formation of new brain cells in neurogenesis that we talked about. It just forms new brain connections, and it just allows your brain to be more robust and healthy with time. And that improves creativity, that improves productivity, that kind of improves sleep and your overall brain health and just your happiness overall. And it also, coming back to the trauma and stuff we talked about, this kind of training can really efficiently allow you to kind of rewire those trauma loops, kind of shift your brain's attention to more positive loops and forming new alternative ways of thinking and feeling, coming away from those trauma patterns that we talked about.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of transition into your now you actually have a brain training course. Do I want to call it a course, or like a brain training
we call it a brain training program.
program?
You could call
I
it,
like program.
a course.
Program's good. So why don't you discuss just a little bit about that? I did put the links down in the comments down below. So if you guys are interested in this, it's also in the description. You can click on those and go check them out. But why don't you just talk about those two just a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a 90-day brain training program, which kind of takes you through many different steps in terms of brain health and also overcoming negative patterns that we are stuck in terms of trauma that we haven't processed, because we all have small or big trauma. And sometimes from things from our past that we haven't processed properly, it can go back a long time. So this program kind of allows you to heal all those subconscious blocks, because those are the ones that hold us back from really prospering in our life. Limiting beliefs around abundance and money, good relationships. It's a different topic for everyone, but we all tend to have those negative blocks. So this program kind of helps you overcome these negative blocks. And it also focuses on how we can improve our overall brain neuroplasticity and brain health, by looking into the neurobiohacking aspect of nutrition and also nutritional supplements. Our company also is launching a nootropic supplement in the US in end of March. So it kind of overlaps. So we also talk about what can I feed my brain, because nutrition is so important, and how we can treat our brain from so many different angles to bring that optimal state of health and regeneration, with the outcomes of more happiness, just being more happy, and improving our finances, doubling your income and improving your relationships with those outcomes and goals in mind.
Yeah, that sounds great. I've got a selfish question now. So if you guys are interested in the program, make sure you check it out. I do have the 2 links down below in the comments and in the description. So click on those and you can go check them out. Now back to my selfish question. Have you ever heard of the Muse headband?
I have, yes.
Do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Travis, that you ask. So the other thing, we talked about our program. So we also offer a really a highly professional neurofeedback program, which is at the moment on site in Munich, Germany. But we are in the process of offering this in the US as well, which is gonna be soon. So the difference between Muse headband and our the tools that we use is there are lots of artifacts, and when you measure something, when you measure brain waves with a headband like Muse, you will see some level of activity and feedback, but they're not going to be as accurate with a medical grade device like the ones that we use and the protocols that we use. Like we use really highly sophisticated programs and protocols that we have partially developed over many years, and I have done extensive training in neurofeedback. So to say it in a few words, it's you could go ahead and train with the headband, but it's not going to be as effective in terms of training as when you go to a professional neurofeedback center where it's done using medical grade devices.
Now, is your device going to be able to sell to the consumer like myself?
So this is something we are working on, but we don't have a headband type product in the market yet, because of the reason I just told you. Technically, the too much background noise and artifacts, which are actually not going to give you proper feedback. So it's going to be suboptimal training. So when I work with my patients and clients, I really believe in giving them 100%, and the best way to, and the most powerful way to do it is just to use the best devices and the best protocols, and that's the way they really have that transformational experience.
Well, thanks for answering my questions on Muse. I have a Muse. I've been using it for about 8 months, and I was just wondering your feedback on it. And I've been reading a lot of books by Dr. Joe Dispenza, learning about like supernatural and how he measures brainwaves and everything. And it's all interesting stuff. I am by no way a neurologist like you are. My wife is, what did she study? She studied like cognitive and behavioral neurology in undergrad. I think it was something like that. So she's the brain one. She's also the smart one too. So, but is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you'd want to go over?
Well, there are just so many things, right? If you ask, once you ask me like that, I just wanna say that, especially during these times of COVID, where we're all in very strange, living in very strange ways, it's important even more so to connect with those parts of ourselves that need healing and self-love, and just to tap into the positive sides of ourselves and joy, rather than getting stuck up in negative thoughts, feedback loops, or whatever, some of the things we talked about. So it's important to even more so now to start that healing process, because in so many different ways we all need to heal from so many different things, big or small. So I think now is a very good time, because many of us are living in our homes more than more than in the past, spending more time at home. So it's a very good way to channel all that time and energy into self-growth and development, rather than it's easy to fall into negative patterns. So I just wanted to put that out there and connect to other people out there who are going through similar situations like you. It's just so powerful to just connect and share those experiences. Yeah, that would be that.
Yeah, I still connect socially. It's very hard to do it now, of course, with
Yeah.
COVID, but you can still do it safely. I go to my church 3 times a week. Sunday for regular mass, we're all socially distanced. We all wear our masks. And then on Wednesday, we have our small group, which is a group of us. There's 15 of us that get together. Again, all socially distanced, but we're in a room talking, socializing. And then Friday morning, same thing. It's another small group that we get together and we socially distance. We have our masks on, and you can still have that social setting and be safe with COVID going on. So don't be afraid to get out there and meet with somebody. Just be safe about it and try not to spread COVID. That's kind of the key. So Dr. Akram, let people know how they can get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you.
Yeah. So my company's website is brainvincible.com. So that's where people can find all the information about the course that I talked about. And I have a YouTube channel and a podcast myself, where I have interviewed you a few weeks ago. And that's called The Doctor's Podcast with Rabea Akram. You can find it on YouTube. And I'm on Instagram under Dr. Rabea. And I also have a Facebook group called Ask a Neurologist, which is where you can ask your brain health related, cognitive performance, brain training related questions, and I'm happy to answer those.
I'm pulling up your YouTube channel to put that in the show notes down below in the comments in the description, so you guys can go follow her on YouTube.
Thank you so much, Travis, for having me. It was a pleasure.